Thank you, Jim, so much. And thank you so much for all of your leadership, all of your visionary work in advancing this cause of ensuring that this online environment is safe for children. And I thank you so much for all the leadership that you've given on this issue over all the years. I mean, Common Sense Media has now become the go-to place if you want to get information, the go-to place if you want to lobby on issues to improve the relationship between families and the media in our country. And that's just an incredible achievement for what you have been able to accomplish with Bruce Reed and April Delaney and this incredible team which has been assembled. It's an army of advocates across the country that every single day is focusing upon these issues. And every new revelation that that we receive about the abuse of information online, every single explosive new story is contributing to the telescoping of the time frame that is going to be needed in order to pass meaningful legislation, meaningful rules and regulations to ensure that we put in place guidelines, guardrails that can be used in order to protect children, especially within our society, but not to exclude their parents as well, because abuse of their information is taking place on a daily basis as well. But first and foremost, we have to make sure that kids are protected, that their information, that their privacy, that their lives are not adversely affected by this incredible revolution, which is still only 20 years old in many ways, and still hasn't been fully understood in terms of its impact on our society. So Jim is right. Back in 1990, we met as I was passing the Children's Television Act of 1990. And that's a law that put the guidelines in place for traditional television stations in terms of what their obligations are to run educational and informational programming every single week, to make sure there was a minimization of advertisements on that programming, to make sure that host selling, to make sure that that the half hour or hour program targeted at kids wasn't just an infomercial trying to sell them toys as the real purpose of that television program. And in fact, that bill was initially vetoed. And I had to pass it a second time in order to make that the Constitution for traditional television. So this battle goes back to that era, but that's the BF era, that's the before Facebook era, as is the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which I was able to author in 1998, which is the Constitution for online privacy in our country, but that's for kids 12 and under, which is so BF, right? So before Facebook, in terms of the pernicious impact which all of this targeting, marketing is having upon young people in our country. So that Child Online Privacy Protection Act, that was in an era where only birds tweeted, and the only tubes we watched were in televisions. But as the threats that children face constantly evolve, we must innovate and develop new ways to safeguard kids from emerging dangers. Today, I'd like to discuss 3 current fronts that I am working on in conjunction with Common Sense to protect children and teens in the digital age. The first step is privacy. We must simply do a better job at protecting teens' privacy online. Research tells us that 95% of teens have access to a smartphone, and close to half of teens say that they are online almost constantly every day. Sadly, in 2019, a 13-year-old has as many, or as few, if you ask me, privacy rights online as an adult in this room. And that is wrong. That is just plain wrong. That's why I recently introduced an update to the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, our COPPA, with Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. Our bipartisan COPPA 2.0 would, 1, require parental consent before collecting kids' data, and teen consent before collecting data about teens 13 to 15. Ban targeted ads to children. Create an eraser button for parents and children by requiring companies to permit users to eliminate publicly available personal information submitted by the child. Revise COPPA's actual knowledge standard to a constructive knowledge standard so that websites that should reasonably know that kids are on their websites need to get consent in order to collect children's data. And that is a much higher standard, which these companies will have to meet. Establish a youth privacy and marketing division at the Federal Trade Commission, which will be responsible for addressing the privacy of children and minors and marketing directed at children and minors. It is about time that the Federal Trade Commission had a youth privacy and marketing division so that they can have people dedicated to patrolling this beat every single day. As Congress works on comprehensive federal privacy legislation for Americans, I will be fighting to make sure that at the very least, kids and teenagers get the heightened special protections which they deserve. But privacy is only one of the issues at the top of parents' minds when they see their children's faces buried in their mobile devices. The second front is to promote better understanding of how technology and media affect children's minds, bodies, and emotions. In the old days, parents knew what kids were watching on TV. The televisions were in plain sight in the living room. But today, kids have their own mobile phones and tablets, and they can separate themselves from a world where the parents can see what's on the TV set that the kids are watching. So while kids' faces are covered in the glow of their screens, parents are in the dark as to what the kids are actually looking at. And kids' increased use of technology and constant consumption of digital media is nothing short of a tectonic shift in our culture. But we lack key information about what the side effects of this change will be down the line. So that's why I've introduced the Children's Media and Research Advancement Act to get to the bottom of this. And I'm doing it with a Republican, with Roy Blunt from the state of Missouri. In the same way that on the first bill I mentioned, I'm doing it with Josh Hawley, a Republican from Missouri. This should be an effort which knows no partisan line. This is a crisis in the country that must be dealt with, and it must be dealt with across the political spectrum. So here's what the bill that Senator Blunt and I are introducing. The bill will commission a 5-year, $95 million initiative at the National Institutes of Health to investigate the impact of tech and media on kids cognitively, physically, and socioeconomically. And I'm thrilled that I'm able to work with Senator Blunt on this issue, and Senator Sass, and Senator Collins from Maine, and Senator Bennett from Colorado, and Senator Schatz from Hawaii. Bipartisan, 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 bipartisan. And Apple and Facebook and Google and Charter Communications and Amazon are joining with Common Sense Media and leading pediatricians and academics in support of this legislation. It's time for us to understand the impact which this social media phenomenon is having upon the children of our country. We need a longitudinal study to be able to fully understand the impact. We just can't pretend it's not having an impact. So that is what we're trying to focus upon, gaining the critical insights into how kids' tech could be related to problems like anxiety, attention issues, lack of sleep, and for the sake of those families, we need the answers to those questions. And as we fight to promote research and protect children's privacy, we may also have to acknowledge that the internet without more rules simply is not safe and healthy for kids. And that is why the third focus of our work together, it will be to enact strong protections for kids against manipulation, marketing, and harmful content online. So today, I am proud to announce that I plan to introduce in the coming weeks the Kids Internet Design and Safety Act, the KIDS Act. Specifically, my bill will combat online design features that coerce kids and create bad habits. 2, commercialization and marketing that manipulate kids and push them into a consumer culture. And 3, amplification of inappropriate and harmful content on the internet. It is time to face the chilling reality that some websites and apps today are built in ways that harm children. The very structure and underlying code of the platforms that children use on a near constant basis today inherently poses risks to kids' well-being. So first, we have to tackle pressing issues of design. Take autoplay, for example. This setting on platforms like YouTube means that when one video ends, another instantly begins. As a result, children often stayed glued to their screens for unhealthy amounts of time. Whether it's a television screen or a smartphone screen, we know that too much screen time is bad for children's health. Similarly, push alerts from child-directed apps encourages kids to drop whatever they're doing and pull out their devices when they feel their pockets buzz. Children's games for mobile devices also include visual cues and default settings that nudge kids to share their information and even spend their parents' money. Apps and services directed to children should not be built in ways that coerce kids whose brains lack relevant defenses and decision-making skills. It's time to put manipulative design features out of bounds. Next, the KIDS Act will combat the internet's increasing commercialization of kids' lives. I am a firm believer in the principle that kids' childhoods shouldn't be saturated with advertisements, but more and more. Children's lives are lived online, and brands are targeting kids on the internet so they can lock young people in as customers for life. We saw Big Tobacco do it with cigarettes, and we know the result of that kind of manipulative marketing. Research shows that over 3/4 of kids trust commercial recommendations in YouTube videos more than traditional commercials. Amazing. And more than half of kids have tried, purchased, or asked their parents for toys because they saw them on YouTube or Instagram. In 1990, I wrote the Children's Television Act to put limits on the amount of advertising that can appear during kids' television shows. And Congress passed that law and stopped advertisers from flooding children with an endless stream of commercials. Those rules remain critical, but no analogous rules exist for online advertising. It's an ecosystem untouched by regulation in terms of how it impacts children. Marketers have taken advantage of this regulatory black hole in marketing guardrails, and as a result, kids are pushed to buy products at every turn online, with unboxing videos becoming all the rage with kids. One video of a girl opening a box with a new doll has over 20 million views by kids. That's why my bill will establish advertising rules of the road for kids' content on the internet. It will put a stop to product placement, host selling, program length advertising in child-directed materials. Kids deserve information, not infomercials. And the Kids Act will create labeling requirements so parents can identify the videos that will educate and enrich their children while avoiding empty commercial content. Child development experts tell us that children are not able to decipher ads from regular content. It's clear that Congress should put rules on the books so that kids aren't thrust into a culture of consumerism before they are equipped to navigate it. And finally, the Kids Act will address the ways in which websites systematically serve children harmful and inappropriate content. YouTube is far and away the top website for kids today. Research shows that a whopping 80% of 6 through 12-year-olds use YouTube on a daily basis. But when kids go to YouTube, far too often they encounter inappropriate and disturbing video clips that no child should ever see. In some instances, when kids click to view cartoons and characters in their favorite games, they find themselves watching material promoting self-harm and even suicide. In other cases, kids have opened videos featuring beloved Disney princesses and all of a sudden see a sexually explicit scene. To make matters worse, once a child consumes one of these inappropriate videos, the website's algorithms begin to prompt the child to watch more content of this sort. The website's recommendation engine has one goal: to keep users on the platform at all costs. Their metric for success is engagement, a measure of the time users spend on the website and the number of videos that they watch. We all know that the exposure to violent and sexual materials can have serious implications for kids' well-being. Platforms like YouTube have an ethical obligation to keep violent and dangerous content away from children. Unfortunately, it is clear that without enforceable rules, platforms will continue to build their websites in ways to drive up clicks and views and promote access to harmful content at the expense of children's best interest. That is the problem, that children are just considered to be another market. It's no different than the Joe Camel ads of a generation ago, just targeting kids, knowing how vulnerable they are. We learned with smoking that if you haven't started to smoke by age 19, you're highly unlikely to ever smoke because you're no longer subject to peer pressure. That's why the tobacco companies had to target the 11, the 12, and 13-year-olds to get them going early, so they're already addicted. The same thing is happening here. They know they have to get them early, get them addicted early, make them customers for life early. But unfortunately, the price that is paid is that these kids are exposed to content that they should never see. And that's why we are going to ban the algorithms that promote children's consumption of violent and abusive sexual and exploitative content. It will also establish key transparency rules to ensure that parents and experts know what material websites are pushing to children. Today's internet is a child's 21st century playground. And we can't keep them safe from every potential harm, but we can and we must put in place common sense, thank you, common sense, rules to ensure that kids are able to grow up without being psychologically manipulated by online design features, exposed to inappropriate and dangerous material, or bombarded with commercial content so that adults can make money, so adults can have bigger homes, can have bigger swimming pools at the expense of other people's children in our country. That is wrong. We must take on those who are trying to exploit these kids for their own financial benefit. It is just wrong, and that is what this battle is going to be all about. We don't allow companies to sell kids toys that contain toxic chemicals or dangerous components, so we shouldn't allow tech companies to peddle content in a way that hurt children. Profits cannot come before people. Corporate earnings cannot come before kids. I look forward to working with all of you as we continue the fight to protect children in today's technological landscape and media environment. The stakes are high, and the effort will require collaboration from parents, policymakers, academic experts, and everyone in between to address the urgent issues facing children today. And we call upon the industry to work with us to put these standards in place. They say that their intent is not to exploit children. Well, work with us to put in place the common sense rules that will ensure that that is the case. Put your own profits into the consideration and ask whether or not, in good conscience, you can continue to profit from exploiting this child market. Children represent only 20% of our nation's population, but they represent 100% of our future. And we have to make sure that we put in place the protections that guarantee that they have an enriching environment online and not one that degrades and debases their childhood as they are growing up. So I can't thank you enough at Common Sense. I can't thank everyone who is here, who is a child advocate. This is the battle of our time. This is a world where kids are online 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. It is their life. It is like oxygen to them. They cannot live without it. And unfortunately, too many people know that and are trying to market to them in a way that is absolutely unconscionable. So you are the Army. I am with you. And what I would ask you to do is just keep your energy level high. This is the best environment we've ever had because of how well educated the public now is as to the way in which the internet can be exploited for nefarious purposes. So let us try in the next 2 years to get these laws on the books. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Jim Steyer, and thank you for everybody at Common Sense for everything which you are doing.